Mark Braverman PhD is a research fellow in systematic theology and ecclesiology at Stellenbosch University and executive director of Kairos, USA, founded in response to the Kairos School of the Palestinian Christians. His work has been focused on Christian Zionism, ecumenism, and the role of Christian-Jewish relations in the discourse on Israel-Palestine. He served on the steering committee of the World Council of Churches, Palestine, Israel, Ecumenical Forum, and as an advisor, it's at the World Council of Churches, Palestine and Israel Ecumenical Forum, and as an advisor to the Public Affairs Committee of the General Council of the World Communion of Reformed Churches. He serves on the Global Kairos for Justice Theology Working Group of Kairos Palestine. Dr. Braverman is the author of 2 books, Fatal Embrace, Christians, Jews, and the Search for Peace in the Holy Land, and A Wall in Jerusalem, Hope, Healing, and Struggle for Justice in Israel and Palestine. He has authored peer-reviewed articles and book chapters on Zionism, ecumenism, post-Holocaust theology, and the role of the global church in the support of the Palestinian struggle, which, it's very interesting from everything I've read there. There were some things that many people would think are apparently contradictory, and yet you have, been involved in different angles, and that is really interesting. So I'm actually deeply fascinated now what you're going to discuss. So the floor is yours, Mark.
Well, take a deep breath. I apologize for the confusion earlier. There's a technical problem and of various kinds, and I just I didn't get the time right. But I'm glad to finally be here and to have at least been able to catch Dr. Khan and who I could listen to all day, I think, and Rabbi Weissman. Thank you for your Devar Torah. So let me plunge in because I know that the time is short. Let me just say also, Paul, in response to your curiosity, just to introduce myself, also to thank the sponsors and to thank my friend Safi for inviting me. I come to this conversation as a Jew, heartbroken by the struggle that my people are experiencing now and what we have created in our search for self-determination and security and safety. As a Jew, I understand where Zionism comes from, down to my bones. And I believe that it was a wrong turn for us in our search for that security and that safety and that self-determination. And I'll say more about that. Also, it would have been useful for me to have been able to listen to all of the conversations today. For me, the really good part here is not listening to myself talk, but listening to others, being able to respond, and then hearing the response of others between us. So I'm hoping that there will be time for that. It's also unfortunate that I haven't had a chance to hear the whole conversation because I think that what I'm throwing into the conversation now, and Safi and I talked about this, is coming from a different angle. When I read the description of the conference and the mission of the conference, my response was, yes, I understand and deeply also yearn and crave this kind of conversation between our religious communities. And the interfaith, or whatever you want to call it, the interfaith project is a critically important project. And we all grew up in it in the 20th century. This is when it started. But I'm going to propose now that what is going on now in the world and the urgency of what we're confronting now, that it's not what is going on between religious communities, but what is going on within each community that is critically important. There are two different agendas here, and I wish this were not so, but history is such that we have communities with boundaries, with histories. And when you talk about talking together, there's some very, very important agendas that have to be pursued. This is a different agenda than what is going on within Islam, within Judaism, within Christianity, and this is on a historical basis, which is not necessarily the kind of faith that you would want to put on to the outside, to the world outside the boundaries of your group. Sometimes even within the group, those boundaries are preserved between leadership and rank and file. There are different agendas. One has to do with creating friendship and keeping the peace, keeping everyone in the tent, in a large tent, but being able to talk to one another within it. It's about harmony, acknowledging boundaries and harmony, versus the deep, painful struggles, divisive struggles that happen within religious denominations and religious groups about what it means to do the right thing when it interferes with the internal project of harmony. What the World Council of Churches says, and they just had a conference last week, which I'll refer to, it's always been about unity. For the Christianity, the ecumenical movement has been about, are we a form of the church, or are we an organization that of churches that above all has to keep the house standing and everybody reasonably happy, as opposed to fulfilling the mission of the gospel, which is to free the captives and give sight to the blind. Jesus' quote from the prophet Isaiah. Those, I'm sad to say, are in conflict often, those two agendas. And it would be nice if we could bring them together. But my experience in particular dealing with Jews and Christians with respect to the issue of Palestine tells me differently. By the way, I'm going to speak with experience and some authority with respect to Judaism and Christianity. No firsthand experience with Islam. I have dear friends and have read wonderful books, and I've heard Dr. Khan now. And so I can only infer from what I hear that the same internal struggles obviously go on within Islam, and I think Dr. Khan, you referred to that. I think today, the most important thing is for each community to look to its own house and to honor those struggles above all, and to be prepared to deal with the pain and the conflict and the discomfort that it brings, because we don't like conflict and we don't like divisiveness. But we can't afford to smooth things out now, because the right things will not be done. Some examples. The other way I would put it would be that the conflict is between joining with empire, broadly defined, and it's everywhere, and remaining true to the foundational principles of faith. Now, I know it doesn't look good for the others as well as within to think, wait a minute, we have a conflict about being true to the foundational principles of our faith. Well, okay, let's be real. If you look at the history of any of the religions, you have those conflicts, especially true for Christianity. I think it may be true for Islam as well. And now finally, for Judaism, because we've become empowered. And it's the same struggle. Are we working for God? Are we being true to the Torah, to the Gospels, to the teachings of the prophet? Or are we taking care of keeping our house going? Which means always frank accommodation with powers and principalities, as well as changing your own self internally so that those two things are not in conflict. You're not just playing a part to gain power and to be part of the power structure. You change yourself to do that. That has certainly been true for the church. We all know what happened in the 3rd century with Emperor Constantine, and with basically the church and empire merging. Catastrophe for Christianity. And the churches and Christians have been working on dealing with that and continue to do that to this day. But there was the Reformation, for example. A profoundly important struggle. We have said that was not a good thing. Yes, of course, now it created a lot of conflict in the future and a lot of pain, but that was a healthy thing for the church itself to have undergone, and it continues to do that. Historically, for the Jews, the Bible, the Jewish texts are a record of conflict. I mean, the best shorthand for it is conflict between power and faithfulness, greed, and its opposite, prophet and king. And there's always that tension. And the question of how do we relate to the people around us? Now, the problem for me with the Old Testament is that that remains to some extent unresolved, because at the very end of the Bible, we've come back from the Babylonian exile. We are reestablishing ourselves as the Davidic dynasty in Palestine, now in the presence of lots of other people. And the important thing is keep your boundaries straight. And that has been really the history of deeply embedded in Jewish identity all through history for obvious and very, very good reasons. But the conflict that emerged from that is that our insularity and our sense of needing to defend ourselves always against the hostile world that wants to kill us. And I grew up with this, even though I grew up in mid-20th century Eastern Seaboard United States, a very liberal atmosphere, never experienced much anti-Semitism myself. All that consciousness of that identity and that sensibility was very, very much ingrained in me. And for me, that's the difficult and the dark side of being Jewish, as opposed to the wonderful side of being Jewish. So the way we resolve things, and the Holocaust really put close the deal. Holocaust, the Zionism emerged out of the conviction on the part of Jews that it wasn't working. They would never be integrated, assimilated, and accepted by Western European society. And we need a state of our own, and nationalism, ethnic nationalism was the zeitgeist, and the rest is history. But it means that what was reinforced for us was what ultimately resulted in our grabbing for power and accepting it. And I believe now that the challenge for the Jewish people, what must drive us is not to think about what has been done to us. Our story up until recently was the story of Jewish history was survival in the face of the attempt to destroy us. We say these words over and over again every year on the Passover. God reached out his hand and saved us from them. But in every age, a tyrant rises up to destroy us, and we survive. That's been our story. But our story today is not what was done to us, but what we are now doing to others. And that is a major, major conflict, an important struggle and conversation within the Jewish community. We have to deal with this. We are in a lot of trouble, psychologically, spiritually, theologically. We are in a lot of trouble. And we have to work it out. But what I want to say to Christians, especially, and I've been saying this for a decade, 2 decades, to church organizations and church denominations that I've worked with, you need to let us have our family conversation. It's really critical for us, put it next to your Reformation, for example, or the church struggle in Nazi Germany, or the South African churches struggling against apartheid. That's how important it is for us to have to put that out on the table and to work on it, okay? But you, as the churches, have your own struggle, which is between doing what you know is the right thing with respect to the colonization and ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, and to put at risk or to deal with the consequences to the relationship that you've been able to establish and reconcile with the Jewish people in the ongoing process since World War II. Those are in conflict. Church anti-Semitism, for which it has so much to answer for, and its need to find a way to join with the Jewish people again and to try to heal those wounds on the one hand, and the human rights question, the urgent question of human rights, as important as the liberation struggles in Africa in the 60s, where the World Council of Churches established a program to combat racism and actually gave funding to armed conflict. Little known story. The church did the right thing. Did it create conflict within the church? Where people called names to each other? Absolutely. And they went right through to working with the South African churches to end apartheid. Okay. The church knew what it was doing then. So that is being asked again. The Palestinian churches, the Palestinian Christians have called to the churches of the world. That kind of conflict has to happen if the church is going to do the right thing. That's the short story. And so I will argue today, and I'll close with this, the path to peace lies not in the faith communities talking to one another, although that is a good and important activity, but to listen to their own houses. It's really urgent. These struggles are critical now, not only for the future of each religion, but for the fate of the world, because they all center around the same question. First one, asked and answered by Jesus, who is my neighbor? And then Rabbi Hillel, if I am only for myself, who am I? And I'm sure that the prophet poses the question as well. And it has to be asked again and again. It's not a principle written in stone. It's a journey. There is a commonality which we must share. It's not the fact that we all seek the same God and we can show that, our different traditions do that in different ways. And of course, we all share the same God. If God is God, he's God of everyone. But to share how we all are as passionately involved in carrying out the will of God, and to be God's hands on earth, bringing about a world of peace and sustainability. to share how we managed to do that in every generation within our own faith traditions. That's how we can come together. I think, Abraham Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. marching arm in arm to some of that. There's an iconic image, and what Heschel is repeated to have said about that was, I felt like my feet were praying. So yes, we must all walk together, and we must be mindful of what that prayer is about. It's not about keeping your house standing. It's not about avoiding conflict. It's about being clear within ourselves and amongst ourselves about exactly what it is that we are doing. Thank you.